Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, happy Valentine's Day. How are you doing? All I have to say about Valentine's Day, and that is not anything about this episode, is are you taking care of yourself? If there's something that you're wanting somebody to do for you, what are you doing for yourself? And are you centering yourself in this day? Because it's so easy to get focused on everybody else, which is part of what this episode is today. I saw a TikTok about 3 signs that you're emotionally unavailable. And I sent it to Jen, not thinking about recording, and we decided to talk about it. So we're going to talk about what these 3 things are, but we look at it through the lens of neurodivergence, hustling, reframing it, not looking at right or wrong, looking at the context. Often we learn these things as a matter of survival, and it wasn't okay to have your needs met. So you had to find other ways to connect with people. Jen also talks about we have to look at kind of where we're at developmentally, raising awareness in our consciousness, the pros and cons of what works and what doesn't. I think it's a great episode. We talk about all different kinds of examples, and my guess is that you will see yourself in some or all of these. And it just opens up the discussion. I don't think that there's anything definitive because you get to decide for yourself if things are working and if you're emotionally available or unavailable. Did you learn some of these things because it was the only way to get your needs met? Is it working for you? Are you having emotional intimacy and vulnerability in your relationships? Is that something you want? Is that something that you want to risk? I think it's a great episode. So I'm just going to let you listen. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, my friend. I am okay. I'm here.
You are?
And reasonably cheerful, I guess, with a nice little mix of crotchety in there too. But no, I'm good. I have a sense of humor about my grumpies. So how are you?
Sounds good. I'm good, but I'm irritable. The dog ate one of our Christmas ornaments again. She does it when I'm not home. And fortunately, it's not something I'm super attached to, but I've had for a long time, but it irritates me. So I'm just finding myself a little cranky around the edges, and it caught me by surprise. But like you said, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's sad. Yeah. My dog used to do that kind of stuff all the time. She's kind of outgrown it, but it's frustrating. So frustrating. It's like, why?
I know.
And especially if I know you, if you're like me, you've bought a lot of nice chew toys for that fur baby.
Yeah. Yeah. She does it when we're not here. But anyways, let's get on today's topic. There's someone that I follow on TikTok that I really like. And we're going to take one of her TikToks today and kind of take it apart and see, I don't know what we think. So if you follow her on TikTok, and again, this is no shade to her, but she goes by Gina Too Much Woman. She's amazing on TikTok. But she has this TikTok of 3 signs that you're emotionally unavailable. And what she says is, 1, if you're a people pleaser, you override your feelings and needs to accommodate another because you're unable to sit with discomfort of not being accepted and liked. 2, you're a chronic rescuer. You tend to be attracted to people who have potential or who need to be saved. It's an avoidance tactic because you don't want to sit with discomfort of your own wounds and saving yourself. 3, you're a chronic overgiver. She says, when we overextend, we have an unconscious belief that if I give, then they're going to need to reciprocate. They're going to be indebted to me. We give in order to get because we don't have the emotional capacity to ask directly for what we want or need. And this opens us up to rejection and a big fat no. So I'd love to take this apart. And again, I want to be very clear. I love Gina's work. This is not to throw shade on her, to criticize, but I think that when you're neurodivergent, how we show up in the world, our need is deep processes, deep thinkers, our need to connect and help isn't always a bad thing. I think when we have wounding, it's like if you look at codependence, it's often there because that's what you had to do to survive. There wasn't a place for you to have wants and needs. So I just want to talk about this and reframe what parts of this are there truths to, where may we be hurting ourselves? Maybe it can be really hard to be direct and ask for what we want and to be vulnerable, and that fear of if I let you see me, maybe I am going to be too much for you. So I really want to take this apart and look at them one by one, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then maybe we can look at the first one, people pleaser, after I hear what you have to say about this.
Well, thank you for asking me. As you were first kind of going through it, I was thinking, well, maybe. It reminds me of that quote from the Buddha that said, don't believe anything I say. Don't believe anything anybody tells you. Like, take it in and measure it against your own good sense. So I think that this is a certain lens that she's using, and there are multiple lenses that we could use. So, if you put the lens of, can't wait to hear what you have to say about neurodivergence, right, over this, it shifts it a little bit. Put the lens of the attachment accommodations, or what I call hustling, over it, right? There's a lot of ways to kind of deepen our understanding of what's going on here. I am interested. I actually have a lot of different things that I'm thinking about. And when you said reframe, I was like, yes, let's reframe. And one important thing I want to say is that I don't think that there's right or wrong here. I think it's how we naturally develop. And what's really helpful, instead of like, ooh, God, I don't want to do that. Like, more like, well, how did this naturally arise? And where are you developmentally in your growth trajectory, where you're raising your own awareness and consciousness about the pros and cons of these behaviors or these ways of relating to people. When I first watched the video, which was a couple of days ago now, I think you sent it to me. I only watched it once, but I think I have a handle on what she's saying. I remember, so in relating it to myself first, right, and checking it out inside, I think that with all of these things, I know for me, there was a point in time in my life where I was compelled. It was not a choice for me to extend myself, in these ways. And as I've grown, I remember being, I think I was in my late 20s, and I remember, I feel like I finally listen to me. I'm at this place on the path. There's no finally, the finally when I was 25, now that I'm 50 is like hilarious, right? Anyway, I recognized I had an awareness of the sense of myself that I had healed past the point of only feeling like I could justify my existence to the degree to which I was of service to people. So you can imagine what that looked like prior to age 27. So as I'm listening to this, hearing you talk about it, and as I was listening to her, again, we're in context. My caregiving tendencies nowadays look a lot different than they did when I was younger. Thank goodness, in many ways, because I do feel like I've trended, and I think all of us trend towards health. Like, I do believe that. I think all of us psychologically, spiritually, really do, if we're doing our work and becoming aware, that we do get richer and wiser and hopefully more compassionate with ourselves and other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your thought too about looking at everything in context, because often these are survival mechanisms, that there wasn't room for us to have needs or feelings. And I can certainly relate to doing a lot of caregiving. And my first job in high school, I got certified as a nurse's aide because we can get into the helping fields. And I ended up doing that for a while. I dated, my first love was a man who was a quadriplegic. And I do think that there was some of that because of my history of abuse and having men that were very misattuned to me. I think that there was a sense of safety in that relationship. And that if I give, like, you're going to have to give back. I can own some of that because there's not that freedom of who I am is okay, I'm enough. I can show up, have wants and needs. If it works for you, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay, because how I show up in the world is really okay. And if that's too much for you, then maybe we're not a good fit. I mean, that's a very extreme binary example.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many more shades in between of those two binaries.
Yeah. And I can't ever stress enough the importance of like, let's appreciate our stories and our development without bringing in any kind of judgment.
Yeah. The pathology.
Yeah.
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 And I think anything that says, 3 things to, I'm just like, That just goes against the way my brain works.
So for me personally, the lens that works, and it's kind of like facets. I mean, this is why you could be talking about nearly the same thing with someone, but the facet through which they're looking at it that's more helpful to them could be very different than the one for you. So I don't think it helps to fight about these things as if there were one right or wrong, but rather, how does this relate to your experience? I find this everywhere. Like, whether it's like moms and talking about what worked for their kid has to be what works for all kids. And it's like, same thing didn't even work for my own kid, one to the next. So,
right.
I think just ourselves in context. And so the lens that's most helpful for me, and I'm not saying I can't peek over into other people's lenses, has been that hustling, the attachment, and understanding why, we might do a lot of people pleasing. I think we all have some sort of discomfort with feeling difficult emotions. Like that's, again, one of Gabor Mate's things that he says, that we all need to feel the full range of human emotions fully without freaking out, right? And that it's safe to allow ourselves to do that, and it's safe to allow other people to do that. And that's something I'm still like really feeling the edges around.
Yeah. I think also some of my clients have talked about feeling guilty, feeling like they're not doing enough. If somebody's suffering or struggling because of their childhood, they were made to feel like it was their job to fix everybody and everything. And so that sense of, do I have value just for showing up? I mean, you and I worked through this a couple months ago with, what if you send a polo to me and I don't reflect? Why would you even want to be around me if I'm not giving? So that's how hustling showed up for me. And can we show up? And I guess what I would ask somebody is, are your relationships satisfying? Do you feel like you're vulnerable? Is there intimacy? Is there reciprocity? Do you know what your needs are? Can you ask for your needs? Can the relationship manage conflict? And if you're not having that, then it doesn't really matter if it's that you're emotionally available or unavailable. It's like, what do you need to do in order to have that satisfaction in your relationship?
Yes. I mean, if it's all one-sided.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we start sliding into potentially abusive situations, I find, right?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean if you have reciprocity, it can't be abusive, but I think that if it's really not feeling reciprocal, or you're not supported. I love how you told me when we're talking about some of this, like how many deposits are going into the bank of Jen versus withdrawals.
Right. Right.
So these things, and also I'm just so curious, like, can we define, what do we mean when we're talking about emotionally available, or by contrast, emotionally unavailable?
Right.
When I heard her say it, my automatic sort of sense of it was this ability to be open to the experience, both the physical sensations and the vibrations and the energy of all different emotions. That to me is like, I am emotionally available. I can be here for it. I have space to understand my own and other people's. And I'm sure that that's something that kind of waxes and wanes depending on my self-care and there are definitely times where I'm maxed out. I'm like, oof, I'm just not very emotionally available right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Over the holidays with my kids here, one of my sons was here for 9 days. Not that I'm counting and having to tell you that it was 9 days. My other son was here. The girlfriend was here. The dog was here. It was lovely having them here. My kids were fighting the way that they did when they were young. There's a pattern that we've just not figured out what it is. And I was really concerned that my other son was going to go home. So a lot of emotional volatility in the house. And my role is, and always has been, I stay calm. Everybody else kind of acts out and gets snappy. And my job is to stay calm, which I did until Monday night. And it was very innocuous. My husband was working on something for my son who was still here. And I said something, and my husband snapped at me. And then he went to go walk the dog. And then our very barky dog, my son, yelled at the dog for barking. And then she was standing on the chair looking out the window, and he yelled at her again. And she really wasn't doing anything wrong. And at that moment, I internally thought, I am so effing fed up with being calm. Like, how come everybody else gets to lose their cool? And, I'm the one that has to have the impulse control to not do it. And at this point, I didn't say anything. He and I were watching a movie together, and I just got up and got my stuff and went into my bedroom because I just had it. But when he came in, didn't knock. I was in the middle of changing. It happened twice that night. And I'm like, you're going to see something one of these days that you can't unsee. And he's like, it wouldn't bother me. I'm like, I'd be scarred. You need to knock. But anyways, I got a little angry and said, everybody else gets to lose their cool and I haven't. And I'm tired of it. The next day we did talk about it's okay to be angry. It's okay to have feelings. But instead of yelling at the dog, what you can say is the barking is getting to me. I'm tired of barking. This is frustrating me. I'm angry. I don't like this. I feel out of control. That can we practice talking about the feelings that we're having instead of acting them out? And I'm not saying I do this perfectly either. And I am notorious for being vague about my feelings, and especially when the kids are home, because I'm surrounded by testosterone and what interests them is not what interests me. So I'm not saying that I don't struggle with any of this, but I think these are some of the real ways that this shows up. And can we allow for all feelings, but can we do it a little bit differently?
Yeah. I think this is where the parts language can also be really helpful, right? Because there's a part of him that knows maybe not to yell at the dog, and then a part of him that just really wants to get up and yell. There's a part of you, right, that wants to keep the peace and be that calm presence. And then a part of you that is really feeling held back from losing it. And again, this is where I have to question, like, what do we mean by emotional availability? Again, what do we mean? It's funny, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, we used to call it idiot compassion, when it was like we were so dedicated to being calm and compassionate. And sometimes the thing to do is to like stand up and say, hey, you know what I mean? And maybe get a little messy, get a little loud, as long as we can be respectful. Yep. And if there is harm, being able to own that.
Yeah.
And allowing, again, ourselves to have the full range of human emotions fully.
Right.
That I think sometimes in these conversations, some toxic positivity sneaks in, especially with our expectations of ourselves. I think that sometimes looking at this list again, like the chronic rescuer, oh gosh, it's like I have to be so far above reproach and just unquestionable, and this kind of comes from my very religious upbringing, that I'm not even going to go anywhere near anything that could call into question. So as long as I'm the white knight, the martyr, I can't be questioned or called out, and taking responsibility for, hey, that's not my choice. And I'm not going to set myself on fire to keep you warm right now. You have to own a lot of that discomfort and being perhaps the bad guy in someone else's story. And I think being able to tolerate that. There's a lot here.
There is.
Yeah.
And I think that we tend to often notice details, remember details, be cued on things. And often we've got partners or family members that may struggle with some aspects of executive functioning. I mean, I struggle with it too, but my deficit is not in remembering details and certain things. And it's sometimes really challenging when I'm noticing and remembering and other people aren't. But I don't want to be everybody's mommy, and I don't want to be everybody's brain. Sometimes I am. Like, we get bagels for Christmas morning, and my husband was supposed to get them on Christmas Eve, and he forgot in the morning. And had I not remembered and said, hey, did you forget to get bagels? We wouldn't have had any. But finding that balance, because then we're often looked to, if somebody can't find something, somebody can't remember something, somebody needs help. And because we're unusually competent in many areas, we kind of jump in. And there's nothing wrong with that, but is there balance in that? And do we allow people to not find things, to fail, to forget, so that we're not responsible? My mom's birthday is 2 days after Christmas, and I really struggled I always remind the boys, and I thought, I'm exhausted. And I told my mom, like, I'm just not going to say anything. She was fine with it. I know one of my sons called her. I don't know about the other one. And I just had to let it go. And maybe some of you are thinking, how could you do that? That's mean, that's unkind, but that is not my responsibility. My children are almost 23 years old. And what am I going to do every year? Have to remind them, do you have your keys? Do you have your phone? Do you have your wallet? Did you call your grandmother?
Well, and dynamically, how much is that very act contributing? I know I noticed a friend hadn't reached out to me, and she always does around the holidays.
Right.
And I almost never do, because she always does. And then when she didn't, I reached out to her. the day after Christmas, But this is why I love the question instead of, well, is this right or wrong? It's like, well, what are the pros and cons of this?
Right.
Great. It will remind someone, but I mean, one of the cons of being like the super competent parent is that dynamically it doesn't always yield. In some ways, it's tricky. I want to say like we have to create a little bit of a vacuum to let people to come in to have that reciprocity. And I know for me, it was only a short time ago, maybe like a year and a half ago, where I really honed in on the fact that me having needs and asserting them, let alone desires, like let's not even go there, but needs felt so wrong and humiliating and difficult. And so this, what was kind of masquerading as this like overcompetence in all these areas was really me not wanting to be vulnerable. And this kind of gets to her point, right? Yes, 100% called out. Very emotionally unavailable, meaning, nope, not here for it. Not here to feel that difficult emotion, mine or someone else's, in this case, mine. And so, yeah, that would be being emotionally unavailable.
Right. And often with the mental load, I think so what I'm going to say, I'm going to try and not be gendered, but I don't know that I can. Often in a relationship with children, there's a primary caretaker, and that primary caretaker is generally the one that is mentally and physically responsible for the kids going to the doctor, and who likes the crust cut off the sandwich, and who only likes this and who doesn't like that, and who will only wear these shoes and not those shoes, and all of that information. And often when we ask our partners for help and they don't have that same level of attention to detail, or we ask them to do something and they forget, it doesn't relieve the mental load because I'm still having to hold on to, I asked my partner to do something. I have to check in, see if they did it. And if they didn't, then that adds to my burden. And oftentimes partners don't understand why the other partner falls apart or comes unglued over something that appears to be very minor. I saw a TikTok the other day about a birthday gift that the partner forgot to bring the birthday gift to the party. And the other partner was saying, I responded to the invitation. I asked about the gift. I went and bought the gift. I wrapped the gift. I got things for the party. So the one little part that the other partner was supposed to do and they forgot, and they can't understand why the other partner is having a meltdown. So there's also this narrative of, if I let go of control, nobody's going to do it. They're not going to do it right. They're not going to do it the way that I want. And so having to work through some of that is also part of, I think, what comes up with this.
Yeah, that could be very real.
Yeah.
And then can that be okay?
Yeah.
This like trying to drop the hustle has been so interesting for me. And just rest or rest/trust, right? That the sky isn't going to fall, the world isn't going to fall apart. Obviously we have a big con there to mitigate. You may not have a present like with you. And then what are you going to do about it? Right. As opposed to, it's
right.
Oof.
Should we go through these three: being a people pleaser, a chronic rescuer, and a chronic overgiver? Should we just go through those briefly, you think?
If you'd like to. I mean, I know when I was initially writing them down before we hit record, I was kind of feeling like they really are all just different angles on the same thing. Mm-hmm. But if you think that there's something beneficial about going in through each one, sure, we can do it.
I think maybe having specifics might be easy. What I'm thinking about the people pleaser is, having had family here, where do we eat? What do we watch when you're in a group? And if you're the only HSP, for me, I tend to be the only female. It's funny, when my kids got here, the three boys, my husband and my two sons, the three boys, we're all talking about golf and sports, and my son's girlfriend and I were sitting on the couch because that was what was dominating. And I looked at her and I said, I think we should start talking about lady parts out loud, because the conversation just felt so skewed. And it's easy that if it's just my husband and I to make a decision about what we want, but when the scales feel like they're tipped and my needs are not in the majority, it's a lot harder for me. And when do you go along to get along because that's the polite thing to do? And when do you assert your needs? And that's where I see it showing up.
It all depends, right?
Yeah.
It all depends.
Yeah.
If this is something that happens year after year after year, then maybe you step up and say something. If it's like, and that's something that only the individual person can really clue in on. And that's why I love this consciousness, rising around all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there's going to be pros and cons. There's pros and cons to not saying anything. And then there's pros and cons to saying something. And just where it kind of like, which piece of playground equipment do you want to play on next? So one thing we haven't touched on is our relationship to our power and our taking responsibility for our power and standing in our power and making decisions for ourselves and making those assertions and then dealing with the pros and cons. And I think if we could weaken this lens of like what's right and what's wrong, that would be a lot easier. I'd be like, there is no right or wrong. There's all these pros and cons. This is what I have personal responsibility for. And this is how I'm going to, use my power. And it's an invitation to connect. It's not like disconnecting.
I think this is where the parts work is really important because I've seen this come up with a few clients that something is uncomfortable and we talk about which discomfort is more palatable, the familiar discomfort of not having the conversation and not having your needs met, or risking and having that difficult conversation, but you may get your needs met. And it's not uncommon for me to have clients that go like, I just don't want to have the conversation. So that's when we start doing parts work because the client will say, I rationally know that this is an okay conversation to have, but the thought of having it is very dysregulating. And I know with quite a number of people that I've worked with, that's not an uncommon thing and it's just easier. And I can tell you that when I've asserted myself and in that firestorm of the pushback initially, I've had that like, I just shouldn't have said anything. It just would have been like, why didn't I not say anything? And on the other side of it, I want to be the type of person that I know I can have hard conversations, even if it doesn't always go the way that I intended. And if that means that after having a hard conversation, I go like, oh, not going to go there again because that was not helpful. And I go, well, I was brave and, I was brave and courageous.
Yeah. And how open to feeling whatever that pushback is, right? And what's underlying that if it's someone else's disapproval, right? How much is people pleasing? It's like just you are making all this withdrawals from your own bank to deposits into someone else's bank because you're so scared. And there's many good reasons here, right? Everyone's situation is so different, but that it's hard. Like you don't want to be met with disapproval. And sometimes we are. I know for me, there's been lots of times where I haven't been. Like I remember kind of like pre-divorce and thinking about that, feeling like, oh my goodness, whether it's what is everybody going to think, or it's really not so much about what other people think as much as is like, how am I going to feel? Because often you ask people to identify, well, who exactly are you worried about? And as you click through, actually, I had conversations where I had to realize like nobody's guilting me. Nobody's telling me that this is something that it shouldn't be done. And then having to put myself in a historical context that a couple generations ago, this was impossible.
Right. Chronic rescuer. So being attracted to people who have potential or who need to be saved.
Hello. Yeah, I definitely don't want to do that anymore. I'm laughing about it as like as a therapist, right? Because our jobs are almost the definition of helping people save themselves, helping people learn to love and take care of themselves is what it really is. I know that I'm so much better in that role when I have lots of emotional availability for any emotion that my client is going through. And so that we don't have to push ourselves too hard to get anywhere else. But I think when our own growth game is really strong and you're interested in psychology from the time you were 7, you're like, you know that you can make these changes in yourself. I know sometimes I get very enthusiastic, like you can do this, like it is possible. The line there for me anyway is really respecting other people's autonomy and free will. And it's a difference between being like a lighthouse and, kind of inspiring people versus being a tugboat where you're like trying to get in there and like pull somebody along. This sense of like, well, I guess it's more with the chronic overgiver, I guess, that sense of like indebtedness, because that just feels icky, right?
Yeah. I can see the chronic rescuer a couple of ways. One of them is if you have kids or you have somebody in your life who has challenges with his executive functioning, that it's easy to jump in and you bring the lunch to school, you bring the jacket, you bring the paperwork that's lost, you remind people, you go out and get stuff at the last minute. Is that rescuing? Is it not? And there is no right or wrong, and it depends on the situation. The other one is what you were talking about is, can I trust in a relationship that somebody can be in their own struggle and I can be witness to it and supportive, but it's not my job to fix, change it, or make it better for them. And I think that's really challenging for us to be able to hold space in that discomfort when somebody else is struggling, but it's also empowering. I see you. I'm here with you. I trust that you will manage this and I don't need to save you. And that can be a very empowering feeling for the person that's struggling because you're saying, you've got this. I'm here. You've got this.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really curious. Again, I think every situation is so different because I could also imagine a situation, or I've helped people walk through situations where their project, if their person doesn't change, they're going to have to make some hard decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's almost like all the hope is in, let me make this what I need it to be instead of what it is.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in a situation where you're a chronic rescuer and you can't. The only person you can rescue is yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And the difference between showing up and supporting someone through a difficult time who may need your support, your resources, your executive functioning for help, completing things, organizing, making difficult phone calls, cleaning out things. I mean, this is a little bit different, but again, there is no right or wrong. And there are so many different examples of when it's not about being emotionally available or unavailable. There's so many nuances to this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know I do a lot of, in addition to just, working with clients, people who are trying to make changes, I work with a lot of caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've noticed this in different spots, but a most recent conversation was really looking at the difference. So the person that they were taking care of being a part of, I think it was some sort of like a partial hospitalization or an intensive outpatient, where it was remarkable that the person had a lot of choice. And it wasn't like, here, you have to go to this group, then go to this art therapy, then go to this person, then go there. There was a lot more of empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
And that individual is doing so much better.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about the degree to which it's that ownership. So we can absolutely be there and in many tangible ways. And I think it's this energy of, am I taking too much responsibility for this person or too much responsibility for this change to happen?
Right.
Or, we're using that word rescue, like whatever that means. And I'm sure some of us have gotten ourselves into situations where we're trying to rescue someone that absolutely doesn't want to be rescued.
Yeah. Yeah. Or people that, and I went through this through the holidays, like just nothing felt like it was right. And like, I just wanted to either blame everybody for things not being a certain way or just somebody come in and make it better. That there are people that no matter what you do, it will never be enough because their belief is that the problem is outside of themselves, and learning to navigate that. I interrupted you though. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. That's okay. Yeah. Again, there's a lot here, and that's why it depends. And what's your context? And again, and how much choice do you feel like you have? Like, I think anytime I feel like I don't have a choice, like I had to wake up and look around because we do have free will. And it's like, what kind of early programming is driving me to feel like there's no creative options? Like, anxiety, all that type of programming, what's ever underlying your hustle breaks down creativity. Just doesn't give us access to it. Doesn't mean it's not there. It's always there.
Right. So the chronic overgiver. I also like the overfunctioning. And around the holidays too, like I've had friends that just give really what feels to me to be above and over the top gifts, which is lovely, but sometimes that makes me feel uncomfortable. Is it about the gift? And this idea of I'm going to show up for you a certain way and my expectation is that you show up for me the same way. And then what happens when you don't? Do I get angry? Do I get resentful? And is that about my expectation? And people have a right to show up however. And if I have certain values that I want in relationship and you're not showing up that way, then I get to look at where are my values and how do I want to put this friendship, because not all relationships are going to be at the same level, which is a painful thing I'm still learning.
Yeah. That just always brings me back to like existential loneliness, right? Because we're not always inhabiting the same friendship, right?
Yeah.
What it means to us versus what it means to someone else. And there's probably ebb and flow in that. And thinking about like overgiver, the holidays, this I think might have been the first year. I think it's been evolving for a couple of years now, where I didn't have like terrible pangs of feeling inadequate with my gift giving, because I realized like I wanted this gift to symbolically like represent all the ways I feel about somebody. And it's just, you just can't. It's like trying to put the ocean in a thimble sometimes. And so once I kind of was able to recognize that, see that, sit with the discomfort of that, and then let it go. Like suddenly I'm able to get people gifts with a lot less stress.
Right. Right. And going back to what the original poster said in this is that we give in order to get because we don't have the emotional capacity to ask directly for what we want and need, which opens us up to rejection and a big fat no. So my question is, do you know what you want and need? Do you ask for what you want and need? How is that for you? How is it when you don't? And I think often there's that fear. I had this over Christmas that I generally do not ask for things. And I made a specific list. And once I identified what I wanted, I really wanted it. And then some of the things, and I didn't ask for a lot. And I didn't get a number of things that I asked for. I ended up feeling really disappointed. So on Christmas Day, I just went and bought myself the stuff that I was really hoping to get that I didn't. But I think there's this fear of if I identify what I want or need and you don't give it to me, it's going to open up a tremendous amount of rage, of hurt, of disappointment. And I think for me, part of what I processed through during the holidays was a lot of historical stuff that I haven't been able to access or process because it was never allowed. I mean, how many videos have you seen of kids opening stuff and going, I don't like this, and them getting shamed? Mm-hmm. And that's real. That's how we create trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here, being emotionally available to that disappointment.
Yeah.
Right. And then there again, pros and cons, right? Like it's here for healing.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to outrun that, I call it outrunning the bear now because the metaphor that I like to use, which I've probably said on the podcast before, but it's a hustle, right?
Yeah.
You just like turn around like, okay, so disappointment's here. What's here to get healed? And that is emotional availability, right?
Yeah.
For ourselves. And then if we can transfer that to other people, not make it about us. It's yeah. I have a hard time identifying what I want often. I often won't know until after the fact. And I'm like, ooh, I needed that. Like with time alone.
Yeah.
I think that, I know I've mentioned her before, Brittany George, my friend, she brought it up as an orientation injury. So when you grow up so oriented to what everybody else needs, you can have a really hard time even just identifying what you need.
Yeah.
Because you're just so not used to that. Tell me I can go and do, this or this or this for my kid, or, I love being of service to my friends, but what do I need? Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. I have that same thing. And oftentimes when my kids come, it's a distraction. It's a good distraction, but I don't always center on what I need. And because I'm so focused on everybody getting their needs met, or, are the boys making decisions and is the girlfriend getting her needs met because they're going to go hit a bucket of balls. And I can remember visiting my husband's family. My husband would golf with his dad, and his mom and I did not really get along, and they'd be gone for, 4 or 5 hours. It's a long time to be with somebody. So that empathy also of she getting her needs met, and do I say anything? Do I not? Do I let them work it out? Is that, just all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to wrap up. Anything before we end?
It's the end.
The end.
To be continued, I'm sure. No, but thank you.
These are great things.
Yes. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
Hey again. I'm curious to know, what did you think? I think there are so many things in this episode that are relatable. And I don't care who you are. I don't care how much work you've done. There's just always things that we're rumbling with, struggling with. Over the holidays, there were more people here, more demands. It was more dysregulating for me. I did a lot of going along to get along because I tend to be in the minority. Did I sacrifice and not get my needs met? I don't think so. But when the demands in the environment exceed our capacity to function, we don't do as well. So when it's just me and my husband at home, I manage really well in my routine. You add people in, you change where I sleep and what I do and where I eat and when I get up, and having people around, that's going to create more demand, and I may not function as well. Is that true for you as well, whether it was around the holidays or in work or other situations? If this resonated with you and you're seeing areas where you struggle, or you'd like to be able to manage or learn tools, or to figure out what it is that you're wanting or needing, how to stop rescuing, if you're doing people pleasing, overfunctioning, hustling, and it's not working for you and you need some support, Jen and I would love to work with you. You can reach out to Jen at at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. We love helping people learn how to thrive and have tools, and also to have just a higher level of acceptance about this is just some of the stuff that we struggle with. I will tell you that Jen and I both go through times when we're human. And it's not like we're living a perfectly charmed life, but we know how to ride the waves. We can sit with discomfort. Sometimes we're irritable. Sometimes we're joyful. That's just part of being human. And if we can help you be more human and help you in the areas that you're struggling with, we would love to do that. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.